I'll share the screen and we'll get started. Um, so one of the reasons that I picked some of these topics for the end of May and June was because of what some of my other friends from business, what they've been sort of asking, hey, do you teach about project management? Because it's very hard to find a project manager now. Do you um, teach about lean production? And I've been trying to make up some lessons because they're a little shorter than a normal class, but that also reflect what some businesses are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And a trend is, especially if you're publicly traded, is to reduce waste as much as possible. And the term to do that is to be lean, if especially it's manufacturing waste like defects or delays, but also it can refer to any type of an organization to get lean by finding what's wasteful and eliminating it. And you can hear the term a lot, lean production, and it's figuring out what people want. That is figuring out what it is are the most important benefits of the product and eliminating what is not necessary. So eliminating waste without interfering with the what the quality that the customers receive. So you can see that that might be lean production. So in an office, that might be eliminating extra office space, having less meetings. In a manufacturing facility, it might be reducing the delays between stages, improving the production so that there's less defects. And so that would have come in about the 1970s. Toyota was the one that brought that to North America because they had a very, very automated, very, very modern assembly line, and they started producing cars that were a lot cheaper than the equivalent American model. And when executives went over to Japan to see what Toyota was doing, why was Toyota, how had Toyota become so profitable? It was their sort of lean production, and that's a trend that has stayed in business for a few years since then. So you can watch that video later on if you wanted to find out a bit about what Toyota did to the production line. Things like automation, things like giving every worker the ability to shut down production, trying to optimize the performance as much as possible. So if we're going to talk about companies being lean, there's 5 steps to them. That they identify what it is the customers want, what it is that gives value to a customer. For example, if it's a feature that's not necessary, then you might be able to get rid of it, or you de-emphasize it in exchange for something that consumers really want. They create a map of all the steps in the process and try to eliminate waste between the steps. Then they, instead of pushing the product onto the customer, they allow the customer to pull it. So for example, if if Ford made a bunch of cars and they just decided, okay, for fall 2020, we think we need this many cars, and they just made it and shipped it and hoped that they all sold, they might have areas where in some parts of the world they had more than what was necessary, in other parts they didn't have enough, maybe they didn't have all the popular models. Whereas if they could use computers to figure out what it is customers want and allow customers to order it, like be more responsive to consumer demand, then they would waste less. So that last step, respond to customer pull, means try to get a signal from the customers about what it is they want. And the last one is pursuing perfection, always trying to find a way to save, to improve, to get better. And so again, here are the steps again, you know, what it is that the consumers want, um, map out all the manufacturing stages, create a good flow by eliminating waste, letting the consumers pull by demanding the product from the producer rather than the other way around, and make it as best as possible. So for example, value. Sometimes companies don't quite understand what consumers want. Intel went through a stage where they were growing significantly, and they decided, well, we're very popular. Let's make as many chips as we can. Let's up the capacity of our processor factory. However, it led to more defects. And what consumers actually wanted from Intel was um, highest quality, fewest defects possible. So what Intel had to do was slow down the production a little bit to focus on delivering chips that were very, very good, high quality, because that was what, like, people wanted reliability from Intel more than anything else. They didn't want a range of products. They didn't want Intel to sell a lot of them. What they wanted from Intel, they wanted it to work. So if the company can eliminate features that are not connected to consumer value, sometimes companies, they have something that they sell that they think the consumers really want, and they're attached to it. But if they ask the consumer, that's not actually the case. Sometimes, uh, for example, I know I've been telling you about Starbucks because I've been reading about them. They had an whether or not they should serve the breakfast sandwiches or not. The executives thought that no one liked the breakfast sandwiches, and they kept trying to discontinue them, but it turned out that the customers valued them, and eventually they figured out, hey, this is something that the consumers want. So sometimes the management and the customers aren't in total agreement. So value, this stage, means figuring out what consumers want and delivering it to them. So the next step is to map the production system to reduce any waste, like waiting times, like delays. You initially do the flow chart on paper with like post-it notes, and then you can do it in a more organized way. And the idea is reducing lead time. That's when people are sitting around, products are sitting around, and improve the quality of value added time. So lead time in the manufacturing system is when something, it's between stations, it's in storage. One stage of the assembly line finishes and the other stage hasn't started yet. So you want to reduce the lead time, and you want your value added time when you're working on the product to make it better. You want the value added time to be as efficient as possible. So here is a chart. So at the top, you can see the information is flowing from the customer to the supplier. The customer is making their order, and then the supplier makes it based on the customer's order. That's what's happening in that top row. And in the middle is where the product or the material flows back towards the customer. Okay, it goes through step number one, and this is how long each step takes, and then it goes to step B, and then step C, and finally it's shipped. And so that the idea is you map it out, you figure out exactly how long each step takes and how much waiting around it is. So if you look at the bottom where there's that ladder, that lead time ladder, you see that there's some waiting around. Initially, there's like 6 days where they have the order and they don't get started. Then the first process only takes 300 seconds, 5 minutes. Then there's another 4 days when it's shipped from plant A to plant B, and then they only need to do, you know, a small amount of work. Then again, there's some waiting time, and then it finally takes 3 days to get to the customer. So if we were to take all of the time, it's taking the customer a little over 2 weeks to do their order, but actually there's a small amount of time that's working, and a lot of it is waiting around. So things you can do is, you know, instead of waiting for a big batch of orders, produce it as the orders arrive. You can maybe produce different models at once and multitask, so that, you know, you're not waiting for somebody to, you know, you don't have dead time. Improving using computers to coordinate the logistics. You know, instead of it being 3 days for the shipping to happen, um, get make sure that the truck comes right away. So you're using technology to make it more efficient. So that's what a stream map would look like. And the goal of this is, and it's partially consultants, partially people analyze it and say, okay, what could we do better? And then it's also a bit of technology, where you try to use technology to automate and schedule things to reduce that lead time and focus on the value added time. So John Deere in Iowa, they actually spent $100 million fixing that map. That they had some non-essential processes. You know, they make tractors. They had some features that people really didn't want. They had some downtime, you know, where they'd make the wheels and the wheels would sit around and not be used. So they started shipping the wheels in smaller batches, and they ended up spending $100 million to improve the efficiency of the factory and improve that stream. So the next one is flow. Just again, I want to make sure no one's outside waiting. Moving materials through the production stages without losing any quality. The assembly line that Ford created would be the first example of this. And it also, one step about this is sometimes companies don't trust their employees, but actually you should trust your employees, because they're the ones out there all the time, and they can see what's going on. And someone who makes a suggestion, who's working in the factory, they might actually know more than the manager does, because they're in the factory all the time. So the staff actually help a lot in this stage by making recommendations. And also a part about this is, they call it be where the action is. That the trend is moving away from having the executives in the corner office to having the executives regularly inspecting and touring the facilities, so that they have an idea of what's happening. So you don't just want the executive in the corner office getting a report every month. You want them to be, you know, circulating and being visible and seeing what's happening. So an example of that is GE, General Electric, in the 80s and 90s. They were a very, very trendy company, and their process is called Six Sigma, meaning they give everyone training, and the goal is to reduce defects to 3.4 per million. So out of every million products they make, their acceptable tolerance is that only 3.5 are defective. And they call it Six Sigma training. It's a big event in their company. People get different levels of belts that are sort of colored the same way that the martial arts belts are colored. So somebody can say that they're a yellow belt in Six Sigma if they've just gotten started. Other jobs require that they are like a green or a brown belt in Six Sigma. So they give out these belts based on the martial arts, about how well the person can apply the efficiency training. So lastly, pull the pull system. So an example is Harley Davidson in the 80s. They had all these extra motorcycles lying around, and that was just taking up room. They needed bigger storerooms. They needed bigger factories. They were making motorcycles, but they weren't sure that those could be sold. So that was inefficient. They just had too much extra parts and extra motorcycles lying around. So they went to just in time, meaning like, okay, if we know that the consumer wants this motorcycle in October, we're not going to start making it until September. And then if we know that the motorcycle needs to be made in September, let's make sure that the engine and the other parts are made in the last week of August and that they arrive at the factory just when they're needed. So again, this is a computerized system just in time, and it helped them reduce their inventory by 75%. So that allowed them to have a much smaller operation. They were still selling the same amount of motorcycles, but they just didn't have as many warehouses and as many factories because they were using just in time. So this also means, only replace components once they've been used. So you don't want to have like a big cabinet of office supplies of like two dozen printer toner cartridges. You want to have them only arrive as they're needed. And grocery stores use just-in-time principles because they don't want to have, the produce or the meat or the dairy go bad. Now, it's true that it's not always perfect, because you might have noticed, if you have gone to the store, your parents have gone to the store, that there's some shortages. And that's partially because it's assuming that there's always going to be a continuous stream of products coming in. So if the meat packing plant gets closed, or the border gets shut down, or trucks aren't operating as much, then it could cause a bit of trouble. But the idea is to use just in time, or sometimes referred to as JIT, to reduce waste. And lastly is perfection, always trying to get better, using goals, metrics to monitor performance, and looking for extra ways to add value to the product. One of the trademark Toyota things is stop the line, or andon is the word for it, where anyone, if they see a defect, is entitled to stop production. They don't want someone to witness a defect and then think, oh, it's not my job. They're clear. And look, if anyone sees that something's gone wrong, they're entitled to stop the assembly line to fix it. So what's another way of getting this continuous improvement is, when we say assembly lines, you might be thinking, sorry, there's like a garbage truck outside. You might be thinking, oh, the assembly line, it's very, very fixed. All the equipment is set up, and it's, it can't be moved around. But moving towards flexible assembly lines, one like you can see here, like nothing's attached to the roof of the building anymore. These are all things that can be moved around. So you can move it around to change up what is made. You can make multiple models on the same assembly line, and that's a way to sort of reduce the extra time. They figured out, hey, what if we even made the assembly line a little bit better by making it more modular and a little bit more automated? That might be a way to improve our processes. So that would be flexible assembly lines would be an example. So I don't know, sometimes I mentioned Toyota pushed this because they were the first company to really succeed by minimizing their costs. So some of the terms they use, or you might hear in business, Kaizen for continuous improvement. Muda is waste that they would try to get rid of. Kanban, produce it based on the demand. Jidoka would be their term for automation. And Hajni Kanri, the idea of creating a strategic plan and following the plan all the way through. Well, okay, so that's good for Toyota, and a flexible assembly line is good for a car company or for John Deere. What are steps any company can do? Well, really, even just having a tidy production area. Maybe you have a job, or you've seen a back office that's not as neat as it could be, and people waste time looking for tools or looking for supplies, or they're like, where's the computer, who has the laptop? Just tidying that up is an example of lean production anyone can do. Getting managers out of the office and where the action is, being aware of what's happening in your own company. Bottleneck analysis. So a bottleneck is where there's a backup, where there's a delay. So a lean company would say, like this could even be at, you know, McDonald's. If for whatever reason, one restaurant, the fries were very slow and the orders kept getting delayed because the fries weren't ready. The manager of that McDonald's would want to look at what's happening at the fries station. Is the person trained? Is the fryer working correctly? Are the supplies in the right place? They can be quickly grasped and used. So bottleneck analysis. Overall effective equipment effectiveness, you saw in that little value stream, it had uptime. Well, if a machine is down half the time, if it has an uptime of 50%, that's not going to be very effective because it's always going to be shut down. They're always going to be fixing it. Everyone's going to be waiting. So you want to analyze the equipment, make sure it's doing a good job, and if it starts breaking down too much, it needs to be replaced. Plan, do, act, check. That's kind of that strategic plan. Make a plan, do it, then check to see that it's working. Addressing the root cause of the situation. What could that be like? You could say, I talked about Pixar a couple of weeks ago. Pixar has a movie maybe where it's just not of the same quality as normal. They could fix that one movie. Let's say it was Cars. Initially, the racing scenes in Cars were not considered very realistic. And they could say, hey, that scene's not good enough. You go back and fix it. But the root cause might have been that the animators and the writers weren't working well together. And because they weren't working well together, the team was doing a bad job. The animators didn't know what the writers wanted. The writers didn't treat the animators with respect. And as a result, the scenes that they made together were bad. So addressing the root cause would be getting those two teams to work together. Or if there's always like accidents, instead of just like fixing the accident by telling people to wear safety goggles or a helmet or gloves, maybe the root cause of that is insufficient training. And also document the best practices. So good companies, you'll see that they have a list of the way to do things. Like if you go to McDonald's, to use their fries example, there's not going to be 5 different ways to make fries. I was watching an episode of Kitchen Nightmare, and they didn't have a head chef. So Robert Irvine went in and he asked the 4 people working in the kitchen to make the same dish, and they made 4 different recipes. So obviously that's going to be wasteful. Somebody might use different quality ingredients. The customer's not going to like it because one day if they go on Thursday and they order their favorite food, it's different than when they go on Saturday. So, even a restaurant, someone needs to write down the recipe and exactly how it should be made so that it's consistent every day. Amazon is one that modern company that we all use that uses lean production. So in terms of improving the quality, fulfillment by Amazon, that's where somebody stores their goods at a fulfillment center, and then when somebody orders it, Amazon packs it and sends it. So if you don't pack it correctly, they have a 3-strike policy. The first time is a reminder. If the packing's done badly and the product's damaged, the first time they get a reminder about what the standards are. The second time, it's a serious written reprimand. The third time, you can no longer stock with Amazon. So that's a big deal these days. If somebody at the Amazon call center is receiving an email or receiving a phone call, they can actually go out into the fulfillment center and investigate it. That's another way of letting anyone fix a problem. And even on a retail example, Amazon's trying these new Amazon Go stores. And the idea is to reduce a checkout counter, because a checkout counter becomes a bottleneck where everyone's lined up waiting to leave the store. So you might see, at the Shoppers or Metro or Loblaws, the automated um, checkout counters. Well, this one at Amazon Go, you go in, it registers that your phone is entered. When you put something in your bag, it automatically adds it to your bill, and you just walk out without visiting the cash register at all. And that's their way of reducing waste and being leaner at the store. And so some of their Amazon Go locations have this. I don't think we have an Amazon Go yet in Toronto, but that's an example of being lean in the retail setting. And you can watch this video on your own if you want to see more examples of how lean just doesn't apply to production. So I kind of used these two websites. If you want to go to leanproduction.com, top 25 lean tools, it talks about all the different things. Like, I couldn't mention them all today, but things like goal setting, analyzing mistakes, planning, all these little things companies can do. So that is lean production for today, and how it understand it's not just for production, but everyone's so competitive these days, whether it's having lower costs, reducing injuries, reducing defects. It's important that companies not be wasteful. Anyone have any comments, questions, or concerns about lean production? Okay. So I guess thank you very much. I'll stay in the room if you have questions. Last night I marked your ethical decision-making assignments, so you can see in Google Classroom the comments. And then our next meeting is Monday at 10. And so good luck with your civics and history, and have a good weekend.